Oi, oi. Good morning. Izzy, Castonia. Welcome, welcome. Castonia, you slacking, eh? You getting beaten. You're getting beaten to the first comment. the you've lost the title. I just noticed because I've got like the glove on, and this kind of gets a bit lost in the contrast. It just looks like I've got a tiny hand, a tiny 3-fingered hand that just sips coffee. It's pretty strange. Next time you'll wait. No, it's, got to keep Castonia on her toes, Winners win. Righty. So, next time I'll stalk better, I promise. Alright. I'll, You have to get in the chat a few minutes early and just be like, alrighty. So, today, got lots to do today. Will we get through all of it? Not sure. I will pitch in the tent house before the concert. Yeah, exactly. So give me one sec. I just need to message a couple of people. You'll see why in a sec. But give me a sec. Word. Sorry. So, yeah, today, obviously we're going to continue on. Let's go to Photoshop. We're going to continue on maybe with this later. Later on. I did want to do a little bit more on the Misty Forest because it is still, well, it's kind of at the fun stage where you just go and kind of tidy things up, add some other bits, give it a little bit more, oomph at the end. So it's kind of at that stage that I wouldn't mind spending a bit more time doing this kind of finishing touches too. So yeah, I'm going to do that to start with. And then, yeah, if I get bored of that, or if I kind of get that to a point where I'm like, yeah, that's fine, then I will move on to back onto this. Let's turn the notes off. Yeah, back onto this. I actually haven't looked at this since we left it last year. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. I'm not too displeased with the progress on it. I'd really like to get in here, and because the background it's pretty dominant in this. It has that big dramatic clouds. I would really like to get into the clouds and basically paint the background out to sort of 80-90% before then jumping back into the main figure. So that's something that I think I will do. But yeah, first off, I will start working on this again. Yo, Jonah, welcome. But the other thing that I was going to do today was to do a couple of paint overs. I have like the main Discord group, Heath's house, which link is below. But that server it's not dead. It is dead. That server's kind of dead. There's a lot of people in there, but I haven't used it properly for ages, and so it's kind of died out. Anyway, I have like a smaller group of people that I do critiques for, and I have a couple of paint overs of I want to do a couple of paint overs for images that those guys have submitted. So I thought that would be helpful for them, obviously, but also for everyone listening to see kind of what a critique would look like, and maybe you also pick up some helpful tips and hints. I love you, Alex. Thanks. How you doing, mate? Are you good? Yeah, so I thought I'd do a little bit of a critique for those. So we have two images. There is, let me turn the opacity back up on this one. There is this one from Oracle, and there is this one from Jonah. And yeah, I'll go into both of these in quite some detail. And yeah, try and help them out with the specific issues that they're having with both of these images. So yeah, I'm gonna warm up a little bit first, painting back on this one. We'll save this one for much later. So I'll get rid of this for now. So yeah, let me do a little bit of warm up on here, and then we'll get into the critiques. Try and see if we can help these guys out. Hiding from us in different servers. Yes, indeed. I'm not well at the moment. Missing seeing you. Josh, you're too sweet. Well, hopefully I'll see you in a few weekends at Trials. Yeah, I'll see you in a few weekends at Trials. I'm looking forward to it. I need to get back to practicing. I need to get down the park and have a bit of a run and a dive around. It's been a little while, but yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And yeah, I hope you feel better soon. All right. Yeah, eat some raw ginger. Eat some raw ginger every day. That's what everyone tells me. Get the ginger in there. Yo, Oracle, what's up? Hello. Yeah, I was just mentioning, I'm just gonna like paint on this for half an hour just to like warm up, and then we'll get into the crits. See if we can help you guys out. So yeah. So we got pretty far on this yesterday. I was pretty happy, basically, with the progress on it, for it being an on-stream thing. Like, obviously, painting and talking. It slows things down, and it's like sometimes I don't like paint things as well as I would do if I'm just on my own. But I think this one went okay so far. So yeah, I wanted to paint a little bit more on this. Like, I started sort of painting out some of the edges here yesterday, and it is one thing where obviously the custom shapes no, literally just like eat some raw ginger. um, that's what everyone tells me. Everyone says it's magic and it's an elixir, you know. One more game, guys. Yeah, you got what? You got one more. You got one more. So yeah, the custom shape tool, right? It gives you these very hard edges, which for for a certain style, can work very well. And like, I don't ultimately dislike it for a study like this, but what you could think to do is make your own custom shapes that have a more painterly edge to them. So take a little bit of time to build up a library of things, but as you saw, like we used 4 tree shapes for this, and we got quite a bit of mileage out of them in terms of variation and such. Like, it doesn't look like every tree is the exact same tree here, even though we've kind of used the same 4, and I don't think I even touched one of them. So the same 3 over and over and over again. Going back to bed. All right, dude. Take care. I'll get well soon. I'll see you in a few weeks. Yeah. So what you could do, for example, is make this hard-edged shape, and then when it's a flat shape, just actually go in and sort of paint a more painterly and interesting edge on it, so that it has a bit of this kind of texture, brushstroke edge kind of thing, and just save that as a flat shape that you can then reuse, so that when it comes to what I'm doing now, which is basically painting out the hardness of some of these shapes, you're doing that from the beginning. You just won't have the quick and easy access of it being a custom shape in the library that you can just drag out however you want. You'd have to like copy and paste it, warp it, etc. But if you were doing these regularly, or you're doing like some illustrations for a client, they're kind of set in a place that has a certain amount of foliage, XYZ. It wouldn't actually be a waste of time for you to make a small library of assets like that you can reuse and repopulate areas quickly with, because it obviously saves a lot of time, but then there's consistency between the illustrations. Like, let's say these were going to be keyframes, for an animation or whatever, and you're doing them like this, and this would be like the establishing shot, but then the next shot is from here, someone's standing on the rock, and they're looking in here or whatever. So you're making this new image, this new illustration, having all of these assets already would mean that you'd have a really good amount of consistency between those things, and it would speed up your work process a lot. And then you just have a library of them. Like, now that I've made these custom shapes up here, like I always have these now, so if I need to quickly make a thumbnail or something like that, then it's all there. And I've worked on projects where we have a lot of stuff like that, and it's very, very helpful, and very much speeds up the workflow so that you can get to the interesting part, the designing of the actual illustration you're trying to do. So, food for thought. The real trick is remembering you have them. Yeah, for real. Elite strats. Biggest asset you have is memory. And good morning, Devon. How are you? Oh, just a note, there won't be a stream tomorrow because Daisy is coming back and I need to do some errands and also then meet her at the airport and pick her up. She's finally returning. I don't have to just sort of sit and stare out the window in the evenings anymore. I'll have someone to talk to. But yeah, so that'll mean there's no stream tomorrow, unfortunately. But I'll obviously be back again to the schedule next week, and we'll do some more stuff. I'm okay. Polishing some freelance work. Excellent. Well, I can be a semi background distraction. Yeah. While that happens, I'll be getting on to do some critiques after this kind of little bit of warm up. So even more like working together, you can listen to critiques that aren't for you. Patrick, good morning. Welcome. Thanks for tuning in. And Jewel as well. Welcome back. I I am gonna speak to someone later, hopefully, that they make sort of like ambient background music in the sort of like Silent Hill, you know, sort of dark ambient spooky territory. So I'm going to talk to them about like licensing some several hours of music that I can use in the background of the streams so that we don't have to keep using the same one that I've found. So there'll be a bit more variety, but also some of it will be a bit more moody, bit more spooky, which is what I want. So it should be pretty fun. I'm going to see my grandma this evening. Well, after stream this evening. It's gonna be fun. She's normally when I go there, I'll go with my brother and Daisy and my brother's partner. And usually one of us or all of us will cook, you know, so that she doesn't have to do anything. But she's insisted this time that she wants to cook because we always cook for her. And we're like, okay, like if you're sure. And she's like, I don't want you guys to bring anything. Like, I've got everything here. Like, I want to cook. This, that, and the other. I'm like, okay, sweet. Anyway, so she was like, I'm gonna make you steak. So we got steak and chips. But my brother and his partner, they don't eat beef, so they've got some kind of vegetarian Wellington, I think. So I'm gonna be there with steak and chips. So it should be fun. Just making sure I stay zoomed out here. I was a bit zoomed in. This is the ultimately very low stakes kind of relaxing part of an illustration. Just kind of basically fiddling with it over and over. This is the not so locked in, you know, get a podcast on. You know, maybe a movie on the second screen kind of thing. Just kind of jump around, do the bits that pop out to you, and then move on to another bit. Can't do it so mindlessly though that you need to listen to a live stream. Yeah, exactly. There have been times when I do that though, and I'm so like autopilot that I'll go away for lunch and I look at it and then I'm like, oh my god, what have I done for the last hour? Like I've just sort of, usually what would happen is something that is like a slightly tricky angle, like so something that's a bit foreshortened, or something that is kind of orientate, like a face looking slightly up and to the left or something, has started to, like one of the features I might have rendered slightly more flatter to camera, or like one eye is slightly more flatter to camera, stuff like that. The brain always trying to like straighten things out. That's generally what happens if I'm not entirely concentrating on something. The brain is like, we must have order and symmetry, and it takes over. It's like, good, Alex is distracted, let's unforeshorten this hand ever so slightly so that it looks uncanny. The mist coming out from between the trees really creates an atmosphere. Piece looks amazing. Hey, thank you very much. Quace. I appreciate that. Yeah, the mist was, as I was sort of saying yesterday, always going to be an element that if I turn all the mist off. Good job we color coded all the mist grey. I can find it. Yeah, it was always going to be the thing that sort of really ties the room together, man. And yeah, you see with it off, I mean, it still works. That, you know, there's a nice value separation that it still works. But yeah, the mist really homogenizes and loses edges a lot of, you know, between a lot of things, and that always goes over very well. You know, lost edges is an important one, especially, you know, if you're creating a certain mood. You know, losing things completely to the background be very, very good way to really push the mood on something. You know, not every edge needs to be found. And yeah, not every edge needs to be super well described. You know, you can lose things. It does really create a nice mood. Like doing this same illustration, but doing it on a, you know, midday, bright blue sky, sunshine, and so on, because you won't have any humidity like this, or any mist. You really have to be like locked in with your atmospheric perspective, and your temperatures and your values, much more than something like this. This is essentially like fairly monochromatic. Well, it's pretty monochromatic, right? It's grey, greens, and blues. But if you had like bright blue sky, and the sunlight on everything, you have a lot more colors that you'd need to have in here to have everything read, and you can't really hide in the tones like you can on something like this. It's all chosen specifically, and I guess we could at one point do an image where we do it the hard way and we do it in the sunlight. I'd have to have a little think about how we would go about that. It's doable, but it would be a lot more difficult for sure. Less hiding. Yeah, I've painted some landscapes that are in like full day sunshine, and I have found it really quite difficult. It is quite a nightmare. But I think with the right references and a process, you know, like I used to establish this one, I think it'd be doable. It just wouldn't be as easy. As easy is the wrong word. This came with like very little complications, because of the palette and the mist and the setup. But wouldn't say it was easy. Still had to concentrate quite a bit. But that's where process is really important. Like, if I didn't approach this with the process that I had yesterday of building it up in layers with the flat shapes and so on, we would not be where we're at now with it. It really is a product of process. But you know, as I keep practicing environments and landscapes, like, I will keep pushing the envelope of it and like trying to challenge myself to do something a little bit more different every time. You know, something which has maybe some like architecture in it would increase the difficulty somewhat. Yeah, time of day obviously does that. Sometimes things with a lot of scale, that can be really difficult to get correct. You know, if you have some kind of gigantic, like, old ruin in the background, for example, and then it comes all the way to the foreground like this, like, managing that distance and scale across the piece, going front to back, yeah, that can be a massive headache. Okay. So I'll do about 10 more minutes on this, and then we can jump into the critiques, which should be pretty interesting. And it's something I'll do more on the streams, is do critiques. I will, in the main Discord, there is a channel in there called critical, let's see what it's called. It's called Critical Thinking Crits, lol. And yeah, what I will do when I want submissions for that, I'll let you guys know, and if you drop images there, then I will get to them on stream. And help you out with your own illustrations. If there is anything you're having particular trouble with. Where did that come from? We've got a rogue stroke. Found it. There we go. That worked. God damn. Control clicked it. Sometimes that has a real a real mare trying to figure out what it is. Okay. Remember to hydrate. This bottle, when you squeeze it, it's like a cycling one, so the water comes out like quite high pressure. You can pretty much waterboard yourself whilst on your bicycle with that bottle. Which is obviously really great when you're cycling up a mountain. Just what you need. Okie dokie. Right, let's save this. And then, yeah, we can take a little look at some critiques. Okay. So this first one. is from Oracle, and it is meant to be like a Warhammer illustration in kind of the style of these kind of codex illustrations. You've all seen a Warhammer codex illustration, I'm sure. You know, these kind of illustrations here. These were provided as references. So, yeah, there is obviously maybe it's worth like looking at these first and kind of on an art direction level, like what is it about these illustrations that are stylistically intrinsic to it being a Warhammer illustration, and then looking at the illustration itself and thinking like how could this thumbnail how can we take those kind of higher level concepts and apply them to the thumbnail in terms of the posing, the lighting, and the specifics that makes a Warhammer illustration a Warhammer illustration. So in these, these like codex cover type illustrations, or at least illustrations that go in the codex, these ones are like vertical format. So yes, we have that in here. And Warhammer illustrations, they have quite a lot of contrast for their focal areas, and they drop this contrast off like quite a bit away from the focal area. There's always like nice high saturation. There's a lot of value contrast. There's a lot of kind of mood and atmosphere that is provided by smoke, lost edges, large kind of these kind of things where you have like an entire army going on, but they are they're very sort of like merged up into one shape. They generally show quite a few different units in the illustration. That's something you observe. This dude is a separate unit to these dudes down here. This guy's some kind of leader, kind of general. We've got the ships for these guys. I don't really know much about this particular faction, so I don't know the names or anything. But yeah, Warhammers are miniatures, right? And a lot of the time in these illustrations, they want to show off all the different types of miniatures. It's marketing, essentially. And like similarly on here, right? Let's put them side by side, and we can have a look-see. Yeah. So, what are the similarities between these two that we can sort of start to take away as a something that we need to include in the Oracle's thumbnail? So we have like main central figure in the illustration, and that main figure has a very high contrast in and around their focal point. So not just of value. So we got, basically white and black next to each other here, framing the head. Here we have this like saturated yellow that surrounds the saturated blue, with actually the head sticking out and into this. So we've got I need to write these down. Main figure, framed by high contrast, in value, and saturation. I'll just put set because I can't spell. Yeah, we have. We can put strong pose. Now, to some degree, I don't think this is entirely like super necessary, but it would be something. Yo, Brandon. Thanks for the sub, my dude. Much appreciated. What? OG Brandon. Thanks, mate. Really appreciate that. And welcome. Hello. So, yeah, I was saying about the pose. Both of these poses are what I would describe as quite open poses. As in, they're basically front on, and they aren't too overlapped and foreshortened, so that we see basically the entire unit in a quite a clear way, right? It's not sort of arms over itself or completely turned to the side so that we only see everything really foreshortened across it or anything like that. Again, I don't think this is something that is like 100% needs to be in the illustration, but it is interesting that a lot of the time they use quite open poses. So I'll put like open pose in quotation marks here. Yeah, there's some very strong framing and compositional kind of lines that like dictate the illustration, and in both of these they give like a slightly different way of doing that, which is quite interesting. So just very briefly, in this one, this line that we get by the arrangement of things in the illustration is like all of these heads line up as well in this way, but we have this very strong kind of like wave formation that goes from, you know, foreground, middle ground, and then behind the character, so background, that actually pretty much just points at his face. And because this is in an area of high value and saturation contrast, with essentially two areas of the wave. And it kind of picks up here as well a little bit. You know, we have like this head, this top of the gun that's pointing slightly up, this angle here, and then into this. So we have sort of a secondary version of it, but it's basically kind of pointing at this high contrast area and just making sure that we really see this guy first. There are other areas of like contrast, and there's still areas of detail, right? But in general, the value of everything in this part of this illustration is pretty condensed. Like, there are hotspots, but they're very small, right? The values of everything here, the darks and the lights, are really quite close to each other. Whereas up here, you know, we're getting light next to dark, we're getting blue next to yellow, and we're getting, you know, these very dark shadows for something that is actually quite far back from the camera. We're getting real nice contrast here. So we've got low contrast here, we've got high contrast here, and then here we've got very low contrast. Like the darks, the lights, very low. They're literally just cloud shapes. There's nothing happening here. We just have like this kind of framing where the lighter values are concentrated around our main figure. So that's very interesting, and something to take note of here. The framing. Whoa. Framing with, well, essentially everything. Yeah, framing with, well, composition. And composition encompasses everything, right? Composition is the placement of things, the depth that they're at, the saturation, the colors. All of that goes into composition. So they're using all of those tools to frame. So that's interesting. Now on this one, they are framing it, but they're doing it in a slightly different way. This has a little bit more of a sort of a fluidity to it, whereas this one is very much like directed around this like strong vertical presence to the character. We have basically this center line in white that goes down the middle of the image. We have our character being just slightly off center from this so that it's not completely symmetrical, but again, his head, his chest, his kind of front of his tabard kind of thing, his legs, etc. Even these, they're all slightly off the vertical, but they're all still curving in to, have him be really upright. We have these nice kind of lines here. We have this dark piece behind him with then the diagonal smoke going across to highlight his head. Actually, like the only really strong diagonal here is cutting right where his head is. This smoke. Let's get rid of these. This smoke in the background cuts right across where his head is, and it is pretty much the strongest diagonal in the piece. Like, this is a diagonal, but it's not as strong. This slightly different angle. Take note on this as well. It's been very carefully constructed that there isn't a lot of parallel lines, but I'll talk about this in a second. Yeah, that's it. You said it better than I did, Brandon. He's not symmetrical, but the overall mass is. It's like he is upright and he is standing tall in the middle, and he has this very imposing presence. And we have that vertical line and the kind of slab in the background that is sort of very dominant and powerful, and it's meant to, echo into him. But obviously, if we make him completely symmetrical and so on, kind of loses a little bit of the naturalistic posing of this guy. But there's still a lot of rigidity to this that gives him that sort of robotic sturdiness, but it's just not completely vertical and horizontal that would stiffen it up to the point where it doesn't look imposing. He just kind of, looks like a very uncanny statue or something. So anyway, so that, again, framing with the composition, different ways of framing the two characters that give them a slightly different appeal, and so on. Again, if we look at the contrasts, high contrast around the focal point, check. This image doesn't have so much the saturation contrast in as an obvious a way as this, but there is saturation like in the gold parts of his helmet, in the green, and so on. Whereas we're basically at white here, and we basically go to black here. There's much less kind of color going on in the contrasting elements behind him. We do have some very solid blacks, which is, something from observation is quite prevalent in the Warhammer stuff. Again, they're miniatures, right? When you paint miniatures, you always paint in like a lot of contrast and like overamp the light and overamp the shadows. So it seems fitting that even though this maybe isn't like super realistic, it does feel a little bit more like how the miniatures are painted. Whether that's deliberate or not, I'm not sure, but Warhammer does tend to have this look about all the illustrations. So, you know, maybe it is a high level, you know, art direction ask. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, one is more chaotic, like this image more chaotic. This one, much more structured. And I guess, you know, these are humans and these are robots, so that makes a difference. One thing that I did want to point out in both of these, which I think is done quite nicely, and could very easily be done in a way that makes it feel a bit stiff, is that they have quite successfully, in most parts, avoided lines that are either vertical and horizontal to the frame exactly, or parallel to each other across the image. So obviously we have these towers, they're in perspective, right? So there is a convergence to the parallel lines. They'll eventually meet, you know, way up above the canvas, like, you know, up here, way up here. So they're not tangenting anything. This diagonal here is slightly different from this diagonal here, so they don't appear to line up completely solidly together, which works quite well. I'd even say like this angle's slightly different to either of those as well. This is something that could very easily all line up. Even like a lot of these, imagine all of these sort of started to line up really well with this, and if this was at the same angle and this was at the same angle, you'd start to introduce like a very strong repetition going across the image, which again would make it feel a little bit too uncanny. And while some people wouldn't necessarily be able to spot that was exactly the problem, they would look at it and be like, oh, it feels a bit stiff. It feels a bit a bit too ordered in a sort of unnatural way. So that's pretty well done in here. And I think it's unless you are doing something specifically that needs that kind of regimented structure to it, and there is a specific like narrative reason for it, and I mean like precision, then I would always try and make sure that these things line up, don't line up, and introduce a little bit of that. And that's something we can go into a bit more with this one, because I think this is where we have that. But also on here, this image, you know, we have all of these muzzle flashes that are going across, and there is enough slight variation in these. Like this one's slightly downward, this one slightly up, these two are like right next to each other, that's fine. But there is enough kind of slight variation in these, also with their thickness, length, and spacing from each other, that yes, they're all firing in the same direction and that needs to be communicated, but they're not all evenly spaced, even length, even width within themselves, or spacing between each other, that they become like super egregious in the way that they're presented. This could be easily something where all of these are the same length, going the exact same direction, and like all the same distance apart from each other, that it would seem really, really weird, and maybe even misunderstood as being muzzle flashes, because of how, you know, regimented that would be. And it would almost look like it's sort of a graphic element on top of the image. But for me at least, there is enough slight variation in these that it's still passable as a natural scene in that way, but very easily it's close. It's on the line, but it still passes, I think. Yeah, you're right. They are good at creating like hotspots over the image that don't take away from the main focus. And why is that? It is because it is the only point of contrast in an area. So for a main focal point here, you know, we have our saturation contrast, we have our value contrast here, and we have our like, you know, empty versus detailed. So I don't know what you'd want to call that, but we have that contrast going on. So we've got, you know, three things here that are at play to make sure that we see this. Whereas here, all they have is value contrast. So they only have one of them. You know, we've got dark against light. That's it for these muzzle flashes. So this has three things going for it that make you look there, whereas this only has one thing going for it. And if you manage to do that, you know, here we have a bit of value contrast, right? A little bit of value contrast, and we have a little bit of saturation contrast. Yeah, we've got the blue and the silver and going on in here, but they're only two of these things, and the contrast of them is still quite low. It's nowhere near as high as it is here. So in the illustration, it's basically like currency. That's how I think about it, that you can spend. And if you're spending all of your currency in your focal point, but then somewhere else in the image that isn't important, you're spending all of that currency again, then you're going to start splitting attention, or at least dividing attention, or pulling the eye. So if you want to keep your focal point intact, make sure that you are spending as much contrast currency in your focal point as possible. And as you move away from your focal point, getting to things that are less important, make sure that you spend less currency in those areas, or completely omit spending, you know, the value contrast or the saturation, or, you know, dial those things back, and then you will manage the attention around the image. So like this one, yeah, there are points that are like high contrast, right? There's a lot of white hot spots, but this is the only place where we're also spending saturation, like the sort of shape, the busy versus empty, you know, detail versus no detail, etc. We're doing all of that here, or to a certain extent like here. But then when we go away from this, it's like, okay, yeah, this is a bright spot, but it's only in value, and so on. Like, they're dropping the attention away more and more. So, okay. So, these are, I guess, hang on. These are, I guess, what we would call, you know, the high level, you know, things to understand about these illustrations and illustrations in general. This is the sort of the art direction. So if I was to do a Warhammer illustration, getting references like these together and, you know, making that observations about, well, what am I seeing here, how are the main figures posed, etc., etc. That is a checklist now that I would need to have when creating an illustration for them, to make sure that they have them there. And as as an art director, that is what you're doing for your client. You're distilling the the sort of brand identity that IP has into some like actionable points, so that when you're communicating with your artists and with the client, everyone is staying like on board with the style and the needs of the illustration, and to make sure that it looks like a Warhammer illustration when it's done. One thing, I guess, I tend to like doing things that have like a more foreshortening, right, and more wide angle camera and stuff like that. If I did that for a Warhammer illustration, it might look cool, right? But Warhammer would be looking at it and being like, yo, this doesn't look like our illustrations. This is too exaggerated in these ways, and it breaks essentially the brand identity. And like there is a bit more of an old school framing and painterly style and so on that goes into making Warhammer look like Warhammer. And because they've been around for so long, it's a legacy style. So this kind of stuff doesn't look like particularly modern, but it is what the Warhammer brand is based around. And so they strive to keep that look about things. So it's not that they're like, they don't know how to do foreshortening, or they don't want to, do something like that. It's that it's not what the customers of the brand come to expect and like about it. And yeah, if you want to sort of at least, well, not get into art direction, I guess, but maybe that is a thing. But it is trying to sort of analyze from a batch of images, like what is the takeaways about the specifics of the look of them, and trying to emulate that. Like I said, there's no point me sending like a very, something from my portfolio, for example, to Warhammer and being like, yo, I'd love to do a codex illustration. And they'd be looking at it and being like, well, we don't want you to do one. And if I was to sort of take that and be like, yo, well, I can obviously render stuff really well, blah, blah, blah. If I was to send them this and be like, I'd love to do a codex illustration, they'd be like, sure, but can you show us something that is more like what we do? Because we don't want a space marine like this. Kind of thing. So I think it's helpful to understand what it is the client's looking for. So anyway, sorry, it was a long-winded explanation, but maybe that was useful. So let's now talk about your image specifically. Now that we're all clued up as a gang about what the image should be and what it should look like, we can have a look at Oracle's image and see, do we have those things? And if so, how could we improve them? And go from there. But yeah, I thought it was important to just go through those as context for this, because Warhammer is a very specific style, as you can see, and they do things in a certain way. So yeah, how can we help push this in here? So I think you have a good starting point for this, just off the bat. Like, we do have the main central figure. There isn't any reason for me not to be like looking at my focal point right here, I think there are some values and stuff that we can shift around to make sure this is definitely the focal point. But I think as a setup already, it isn't bad. You know, we have the beginnings of like an atmospheric, you know, battle background. We have the smoke, we have the embers, we have this kind of strong central triangle figure, etc. But I think there's ways that we can push this a bit more, and take what you have and just give it a little bit more, like presence. And also you'd mentioned when you posted this that the depth, the Z space, the three-dimensional, you know, space from where we are as a viewer to where the subject is to the background. You wanted to introduce a little bit more of the feeling of Z space in this, which I think is valid. I too would introduce that here. I don't want to completely change the pose. I think I will sort of, I'll give you my initial thought about the pose here, but I don't want to be like, hey, what you need to do is, you know, go for this pose that completely changes, you know, what she's doing, and it's a different image, because I like the setup and the pose that you have, and I don't want to just be like, yeah, what you need to do is completely change it. I don't think that's helpful. So within the confines of this image, I'm going to suggest like some changes to the pose that keep it in essence the same, but aren't like scrapping the idea. Like I said, I like the pose. There are some things about it that I would think to change. But yeah, within these critiques, I always try and like keep the image that is presented intact, because otherwise we're not talking about this image, are we? We're just talking about a different one. Yes, and like you're saying here, there is a place to be like, yeah, okay, it needs to have like a more upright, puffed out chest, like, you know, heroic pose. But the in the moment part of this is quite nice, and I do like the sort of dipped torso looking, you know, up, the sort of shot to the head. I just think the Z space here could be used a little bit better by only introducing a little bit of foreshortening. And yeah, just pushing this a bit more. It's got that sort of Edge of Tomorrow, like Emily Blunt in the Edge of Tomorrow kind of feel about it, which I quite like. I think it's cool. So that being said, I think my first thing here, just based on not necessarily both of these, but I do feel like our main character and the rock and everything can take up a little bit more space in the illustration, and that not be too overwhelming. I don't think I'd go like as big as the general in the sort of, what are they, Necrons illustration, but you know, I'd maybe stand to give her a slight bit more presence, especially as there isn't an awful lot going on in front of her. Like in the Space Marine illustration, you know, we have this whole wave of Space Marines that goes back, and it provides, you know, framing for this main dude, and he's quite small, but then, you know, we've got a lot of contrast there. Whereas this guy, he's the general, right? So he takes up a lot more space within the thing. But this guy's got a lot going on in front of him. This guy basically doesn't. He's just got a little rock so he can take up more space here. And I think you have something similar with the setup in the front, where it's more aligned to this one on the right than it is to this one on the left. So I'd maybe give her a little bit more space there in the beginning. Hang on, let me just keep a copy of the original underneath. So there's that. And yeah, let's talk about the pose here for a sec. So I was doing this pose here just before in the studio, just trying to figure out, and I always try and do this with the pose, it's like just try and figure out, does it feel natural for me to do it that way? And if it doesn't, then what am I missing about it? Like, what feels strange about it? And for me, at least doing this with like my foot up on a stool and thinking about, you know, the sort of the stride and then bringing the gun out, it feels like it should be the other way around. So let me show you. And it doesn't really change anything so much, but when I first looked at this pose, there's something awkward about it, and it isn't really the way that it's drawn. It's just what it came down to, I think, is that it feels unnatural to do, and therefore the drawing comes across as a bit uncanny. So, you know, this is obviously your version this way around. And when I'm doing it, I feel like this way round, when I'm standing and I've got my foot on a stool, feels like I took a step up onto this rock. So I took the step up and then I turned my body and put the shot down. Whereas the other one, it feels like I took the step up and then I have to bring my gun over my leg to then point down and at the target. And that feels like I haven't taken a step. And yeah, it just makes the previous motion feel awkward. So my suggestion here would be, you know, at first to twist the pose in this direction, which then feels a little bit better for this leading leg, because it feels like a step was made onto the top of the rock, you know, or the edge, whatever that is. And that this backwards leg is then going more backwards in space from this point. So you have the knee, you know, and this is going backwards in space to where we came from. So the foot would be behind it, and this leg is going now backwards into space. Sorry, I'm making a real mess of this. Okay, Devon's going to have some PTSD here about being at work and me doing horrendous scribbles over things. Okay, so she is coming up, stepping up, and then putting the gun down, and then we have, you know, this dude shooting. So that's in terms of the posing here, and potentially I was even playing around with this as well. I do like the sword down, but you could also have it that her arm is back and up this way, and the sword is foreshortened out in this direction as well, as a for instance, this going, you know, really back like this. But anyway, I do like it down as well. So that's kind of one thing with the overall posing here. But the other thing is the Z space, right? So let me try and just draw this out a little neater here. I'm going to do this with some just simple shapes here. Sorry, can't select the right way. Yeah, it's called contrapposto counterpoise. Yeah, exactly. And it's, you just got to do the pose yourself, really. That's how I figure things out a lot of the time. And if I look at the pose on the image and it looks awkward and I can't figure out why, doing it usually comes up with the answer. And it's usually like, okay, the frame before I would have been doing this, and then if I now try and step into this position, it feels really unnatural, or my body's actually facing the opposite, my chest is facing the opposite direction when I do this, for example. There's always something you can work out by doing it yourself that is sometimes a little bit impossible. And like you said, if you mishmashed a couple of references together, then there you go. So here, keeping the relative positions of all of these forms. Okay, so I'm just making a simplified version of this. Just so that we can see where everything is in space right here. Okay, so we would have this leg coming slightly forward, you know, cylinder like this, knee here, then this part going down this way. The back arm, obviously, you can go that way, you can go this way. I think both work. The down is quite nice, so I think the up also works. But this arm, in your current version, is basically going just straight down, like flat to the camera. We see the very top of the gun, and I really think we just need to angle this slightly up and out towards the viewer slightly, so that the impression is this when it comes to the arm, in terms of bottom plane, you know, let's think of the hand as a box, front plane here, top plane here. I'm just drawing this straight right now. Actually, let's draw it properly, Alex. Just give it a bit of a curve. Stop being lazy. Okay, and then here, you know, these guns are quite bulky, so it would occlude the hand, so we're not going to see that. But the top of the gun is like this, and the bolter bit on the front is like that. So now, instead of the arm going just dead straight down, gun pointing down, front of it, etc., everything is now coming out at a slight angle. So whereas before from the side, you know, it's like this, now it's like this. And this enables you to see that front face of the gun ever so slightly. And that means that now this dude in the foreground, this dude that she's shooting, that was like really just sort of flat and squashed under the flat front of the gun, he can now be foreshortened more into the frame. So, let's say that's the head. That's the sort of chest piece, waist, whatever. So he can be lying on this kind of surface, like this. Maybe this arm. The hand would be something like that, on the rock. He can now be foreshortened a bit more into space, and it can even be like the classic hand coming up from someone else, whatever it is. Back here, even more, the helmet of someone here, the back of someone on this slope. We build up this, there's bodies everywhere kind of thing, on the slopes here. Obviously, you can still keep all the people back there. That was nice. This Marine walking across here, that was cool. But now we've got like a little bit more of a foreground that is going into the illustration. We have her arm pointing a little bit more forward. So we've just basically taken that ground plane, taken this ground plane that was like really quite flat and almost vertical feeling in the way that it's arranged and the flatness of the arm, and we bring that up so that now that plane feels a lot more like this. It keeps the same place in the composition. It's still functioning as being essentially a sort of a dark triangular front portion of the illustration that leads into her shape, and so on. I really like the way that this cloak piece as well, that you have like flows into this and gives like a very strong kind of simple edge. Another thing that can be quite important is if you have a figure, one side of the figure has a lot of detail in its contour, all these angles, the arm coming out, the leg coming out, etc. This side is basically simplified into like 2 or 3 angles, but it just reads as like something a lot simpler. It's a nice contrast to have. If you have busy all the way around, it can make things seem a little bit, busy. It's less of a graphic shape, and it's a nice other contrast that you can use to bring into something like this. But yeah, essentially something like this. Now, in terms of the background, like I said, I think you set this up quite nicely. I think I'd give these guys a little bit of attention so that they don't feel exactly the same as each other. The way their hair moves, or like what one of them's doing. Maybe one of them has their arm up with their gun or whatever. I do like this guy walking past and like looking over. His silhouette seems quite iconic. I like the fact that he could just be sort of dark with the eyes, and you wouldn't need much more in terms of him for readability. He could just, be that sort of dark shape with the Space Marine eye shapes. Little bit of contrast on him, but not much. That'd be really moody in here, and so on. And again, what did we learn on these ones? This framing behind the head seems pretty important for these, and I would imagine that we'd maybe want to do the same here. I could drop a multiplier layer on, and we could do a very rough value pass. I think in the original, your original, I would shift this contrast up a little bit, I would lessen this contrast down here a little bit, like this. And even if you don't want to go like all the way to white, I would maybe shift that contrast a little bit to be behind the head, and you know, this front light can be a little bit brighter, and so on. Or you could frame this with a little bit of the rim light. But I think having this super brightness here doesn't necessarily do you any favors. Here are these guys. More like this. So if I'm looking at it here, like, I'm gonna do this really rough, so just apologies if it's like not super readable. And also I hope this is helpful. And you're not like, well, yeah, I would keep this top portion just, you know, very low contrast, battle smoke cloud shapes with the embers. Embers are really nice. Very embers are a super easy way to have great depth across an image. I've got these embers brushes which are sick. But you know, you do like a big ember in the front and then a few like medium ones in there, and then you have like a few like tiny ones at the back. It's just a very easy way to sell where things are in space from each other. You know, yeah, maybe she's shooting, I don't know. Douche. The eyes glowing back here. Etc, etc. Go a little bit brighter back here, get some contrast for those ladies. And so on. But yeah, I'm doing this super rough. But yeah, on here I think you do have a nice setup for what the values should be. And then yeah, we have this change to the space and the pose in here. So yeah, that's basically where I'd sort of go with this one, using your original idea. It's, if we're just sort of distilling it down, I guess it's checking the posing and doing the pose yourself to figure out, does it feel natural? And specifically about that is, think about what the character was doing before the photo was taken. So like, she's walking up onto the top of this mound to put this bullet in this, you know, enemy's head. So like, do that motion yourself and do the walk that you're doing, and do the walk and then try and finish in the pose that you want to draw or you have drawn. And if you feel like you have to do something extra to get into the pose once you're at the peak of that walk, or if you feel like you're facing the wrong direction or it should be the other arm, something will feel more natural to you about doing it. That's probably the way to go with it. I used to always have this issue of drawing a pose, and in the drawing of it, would over twist and over exaggerate other parts of the pose, because I felt like it needed a little bit more like drama or sort of theatricalness about it. And what I would end up doing quite often is twisting, the lower body one direction a certain amount, twisting the upper body in the other direction another amount, and then like moving the arm all the way back, and then turning the shoulders out, and so on. And eventually it would get to the point where it is still the original pose, but it's so over tweaked that it would seem it seems impossible to actually get into that pose without doing all these micro adjustments. And it would make the figures almost seem like they had a broken spine in some instances, because they were just so like overtly twisted. And yes, there are, we make sort of fantasy illustrations where, they are much more exaggerated and more elaborate in their posing. It's not exactly something a human can do, and it still makes sense. But even when you're working with exaggerated figures and exaggerated proportions and so on, there is still a link between that and a normal figure, and the possibilities of a normal figure that you need to keep somewhat intact. There's kind of a point at which you can break it entirely, and everything becomes misaligned and broken. And doing the pose yourself is a good starting point. You can fall into the other trap, though, of just using reference for this and only copying reference and being like, well, the reference is correct. It is correct, but it isn't correct for what you're doing. So if I'm drawing a League of Legends character and they have, a different body anatomy to a real human, and they have a different acrobatic ability to a real human, me using and sticking exactly to a reference of someone doing a certain pose is not going to make the character look the way the character should look. It's going to be too stiff, it's going to be too realistic, and it's not going to be exaggerated enough. So it is a very fine line between over-exaggerating things and over-twisting them, and sticking to references entirely and not exaggerating them. There is a sweet spot in the middle that you have to find, and yeah, I think it just takes a little bit of time and figuring out to do that. So yeah, there you go. Just a little bit of help there. I do it a lot, all the time. It happens, for sure, and that's why, getting stuff in front of people and trying the pose out yourself and all these things, all these tools you can use to make sure you get it right. But I've been on both sides of it. Been on both sides of it many times, and yeah, it's hard not to do. But yeah, really nice piece. I'll save the file out for you and send that back to you. But obviously you've got the VOD for this, and gonna walk up to someone and shoot them. It's for art. Yeah. Yeah, I'll do all of this, but not in real life. Yeah, cool. All right then. So, Jonah. So obviously different illustration here, and different stuff applies, but also a lot of the same stuff that we talked about previously, especially when it comes to vertical and horizontal alignment and so on. Time to unparallel the lines. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, so there are certain things that are implicit in this because of, it being a Gwent style illustration, so the vertical format, and so on. Let me bring up the... don't think these references are like entirely applicable right now because they're more for color, time of day. But just so if people don't know what a Gwent illustration is. You know, it's a digital card game. You know, it has a certain style to it again, which is kind of like a sort of painted realism style to it. And yeah, you posted these references for more of like color and time of day, rather than, you know, the illustration itself. Anyway, I just thought I'd bring that up because context is important. But seeing as we're not at like the coloring or painting stage or anything like that, a lot of the things when it comes to the values, the placement of things, saturation, all of that, kind of not applicable at this point. I think the main critique we had spoken about briefly in the Discord on this was the verticals, horizontals, parallel lines, and orientation of different parts of the illustration in perspective. And before we sort of go into the slight tweaking of lines on this and stuff like that, what I would say is this is an example of an illustration where having the order that comes from verticals and like parallels lining up together is somewhat desirable in the illustration because of what it's depicting. So you have the army, they're standing there, they're at attention, presumably, you know, getting ready to go into battle. And part of the contrast that tells us about the character of the bard in the illustration is the difference between the regimented kind of stiffness of the soldiers versus the more sort of animated and lively character of the bard who's like playing them into battle, right? So there is implicit a contrast that should be understood in the image to give these two things, to give that story element across. And therefore I wouldn't suggest overtly changing every single line to be, you know, really off kilter and like out of whack with each other. My main suggestion here would be to introduce a little bit of variation to the exact orientation and placement of the spears and those vertical lines, such that it still, at a glance, has that that structure and like regimented feel about it, but without actually being like a literal copy paste of, you know, each spear, and there being this exact adherence to the vertical and horizontal of the frame within them. So those tweaks are going to be minor, really very minor, in terms of that, and that's maybe not even something that I would like spend too much time on within this. It'd just be like, okay, I'd be like slightly twist up some of these, right? And obviously drawing them in perspective, because I noticed that a lot of these, or all of them, are like a copy paste of each other, so the orientation of them gets more incorrect across the image because of this, which I would also do in the beginning, just to copy paste them and have them there, but they do need drawing out properly, otherwise Okay, so this obviously really quite easy fix in here. What I would also be wary of as well is like then making sure that, yeah, kind of like the bullets I pointed out in the Warhammer illustration, just enough variation to that, so that what you're looking to do is making sure that there is slight variation in their orientations to each other, to the frame. So I mean, ever so slightly, like honestly just enough. But the other thing that I would be slightly careful of as well is that they don't then all, or at least a few of them, line up in the same direction. So this one, let's take this one for example. If you made this one that and this one that as well, you're going to start doing something else entirely. So just, you know, if they're right next to each other, just slightly off kilter them, but yeah, try and not make, you know, several of them the exact same angle but also off kilter, if that makes sense, because you're gonna create another issue there. And like this one can actually probably stay vertical in the middle, because that would make it different from everything else. It's not too egregious. So that's very small changes to those that would really help, I feel like. Now, the main other, I guess, orientation issue here, which, again, I think maybe even Oracle pointed out that she also had trouble with this, is that like the shields feel too close to the soldiers, that there's no space between them and the shield, as if it's like they've got their crotch like right behind the shield. And why is that? And that is all to do with perspective and where the forms are in space in relation to each other. And I think the perspective, where the soldier is standing behind the shield is out of perspective, and that makes the shield look like it is dead in front of them, like there's no space at all. So what I mean is, it's diagram time. We have standing soldier, okay? And sorry, hello Dan, and hello Jawa, I saw you come in there. Brain overload. Okay, so we got soldier, standing, shield, spear, blah blah blah. And I'm guessing, right, that the shields are like here in front, right? Foot ending like here. That's kind of the spacing that we're looking at. Am I correct in my assumption? Yeah. Yeah, okay, that's the spacing you wanted to show. Perfect. All right then. So, that being the case, let's think about this. If I... Yeah, that's how I'd rest it on the ground too. Yeah, perf. All right, so let's turn these into simple shapes and then figure it out. So the shield, we're basically just going to have as like a, you know, a flat rectangle, and the body of the soldier we will turn into, you know, just this kind of rectangle, right? Just for the sake of argument, if we can understand that like the head and the shoulders and the chest, you know, all of that just fits in a box that contains it all, like this. Now let's think about what that orientation looks like from the front. Okay, the shields, let's say, are the shields wider than the than the shoulders of a soldier. So like, let's say from the front, would I be correct in assuming that if that's my shield and this is the soldier, that this is somewhat the relationship between Aldersaur, thank you for the follow, welcome. Would I be correct in assuming that this would be roughly what the shield is? It's slightly wider than a person's shoulders width. Yep, a little bit wider. Okay, cool. Let's go a little bit wider. Okay. So maybe it's something like this. Okay, cool. So now we know we've established this, and this is important information for drawing these things, and for figuring out the orientation. So, and you could do this in 3D as well, just to mock it up and be a bit more like exact about it. But let's, one other thing I'm assuming here, near enough the shield and the center of the body are lined up, as in like in this, right? My body's behind here and he's standing near enough centrally behind his shield. I'm going to assume that's the case. So if I'm drawing my soldier now, like somewhat in the orientation that's in here, yeah, the height's good too. Okay, perfect. We're just nailing it. We're just nailing the assumptions here. But no, it's good. I don't want to do this explanation. Then you're like, no, actually, it's like this. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll just kill myself then. Come on, man, get rid of that. So let's see. We have it's maybe not even as extreme as that. Okay, so from above, you know, shield, basic shape, person, basic shape, okay? Centers are aligned. So there's this distance between them, okay? Now, if I think about that in this example here, where we have soldiers standing there, you know, camera quite low, he's standing up straight like this. From above, these center lines are in line with each other, and from the front they're also in line with each other. So, you know, if I put the center line here, and why is it slightly off? Because it's in perspective. So this is turned away from us. So we're going to see more of this side than we are of this side of that. So the center line, you know, isn't exactly in the center side to side. You know, you draw across the surface and the center is there. You're going to see more of it on one side than the other. Anyway, center line's here. If I extrapolate this forward, right, because there is a distance in front of us here, this edge of this shield in this position is in the wrong position. What this is describing is either a shield that is far wider than the guy, and I mean like an extra, you know, 10 or so centimeters, maybe even more on either side, or it's too wide. Sorry. So either the shield in this position is much, much wider than the guy, or it is placed much further towards us, to the right of him, because of where it's placed. This edge should actually probably, with it being in front of him, be more like here. And so if I go back to my diagram here, what your shield is showing, because it's wider than he, or it's, where is it? Yeah, it's wider than he is in this orientation. Your shield is like this, right? It's either super wider than him so that it still sticks out the same amount on either side, or it's so far over that the center line of it is now like here. When we know that these center lines should line up together, like this from the top and like this from the front. So in actuality, this shield in that orientation, even though it's wider than him, isn't going to completely cover our view of his body with the center lines matched up. It's going to be like this. And this is what gives us that gap in front of him. So essentially what we've done, or what you've done, is you've moved the shield over this way, like that. Or what you're saying is the shield is much, much wider, and therefore occludes our view of him from the angle that we're looking at in space. Now, if you set this up in a 3D program, you know, you just put two blocks, thin rectangle, you know, with this ratio and so on in front of each other, and you turn the camera and put it where I'm saying, you'll start to see what I mean. But obviously, I'm drawing this in 2D. And we're doing this here. I'm not confident enough in my Blender skills to make a rectangle to to do this in 3D for you. But so really, what's happening here? The reason that the shields feel a bit too close and this is that the center of the shield and the center of the body are lining up in such a way that the distance between him and the shield has to be like 3 centimeters and not like 30. And that's what's giving it this weird feeling. So in this orientation, there's still, you know, the back of the soldier's legs that we would see here, and so on. And then this would be the edge of the shield in front of him, and that leaves space for his foot then to be behind it, you know, like this, in this orientation. Similarly, this guy's shield would appear to be more over here, the center line of it having to be out this way. So the center line of the body would be like that, and then the center line of the shield like that. They can't align on the same axis. Like, given that the shield is as wide as you said it is, here, here, and the center of the shield being here, makes it all too close to each other. They need to be offset because our camera is offset. As we turn the camera, those two center lines rotate as well. So if you're looking at it dead on, like this, there. I'll do a new diagram. Center line of the body, let's do in blue. Center line of the shield on a different layer, we'll do in red. Now if we're looking at them straight on, those center lines match up, right? But if I start to rotate the camera in this direction, you know, so we're turning around. Let's do it in the same way that your illustration is, just to not confuse things. If I orientate the camera in this direction, like that. Have I just drawn it the same way again? Confusing myself now. Yeah, sorry. if I turn the camera, these two center lines start to unalign and move apart from each other. So, and that's because of the distance between them. If they're right on each other, they stay the same. But because there's a distance from them, which we established with this, those two center lines start to orientate away from each other, like this, which then places one object seemingly further over in space. And that is the main sort of uncanniness, I guess, with the orientation of the shields and the soldiers in this illustration, is that the center lines aren't matching up in perspective, and it gives the impression that they are standing like crotch up against the shield behind it and don't have any feet. So we could try and fix that a little bit. Like this. So that's with the shield the shield orientations, right? Center being here, and so on. That I would take a look at. Hopefully that explanation made sense. I was trying to do it in the most sort of logical way, but if you have trouble with perspective, like someone explaining why they're out doesn't necessarily always make sense. Like if you have trouble with the orientation of it already, me being like, it's out of orientation, doesn't necessarily always help to solve the problem, because you need to understand the problem itself to do it. But when I look at this, this is the stuff that I'm seeing with that orientation that sort of, makes it feel a little bit strange. So if I draw over this stuff and like show you, I guess, how it should be, or at least closer to how it should be, then hopefully that can sort of help you go forward with that. So that's the orientation of these. Then the next thing is the heads. Let me grab a fresh version of this illustration, because I've drawn over the flat version of this one like a cool dude. Hawk eyes of an eagle. Honestly, this is stuff that I never used to see. But working with some really good line artists that are very adept at drawing in perspective, and seeing how they take like a shitty version of my sketches and then draw over them properly in perspective over the last few years, that has kind of really developed my own understanding of what I was doing wrong and the things that I was missing. And now it's something where I see these issues in my work, in my older work, and in stuff that I critique. It's kind of like I've had a peek behind the curtain, and I've seen I've seen how the show works, and now I'm like, oh shit. Now I can't not see it. Obviously, it does help, like critiquing every day. For that, okay. So, I was opening up a fresh version of this. Alright, let me close this one sec. Nope. at 8. Here we go. So, got a fresh version. Okay, so spears, we know what to do with those. Shields and the spacing of those, we know what to do with those. Basically, shift all your shields to the right. Unalign the center lines because of the perspective orientation. So, yeah, all of these ones in the background, shift those over. All of these ones in the foreground, shift those over. Jobs are good in there. And then, yeah, the spears. The next thing is like arm orientation in space, and the head orientations in space. So I'd say like the bard, I think you've done a really, really nice job of drawing this guy out. I feel slightly that the arm proportions just need a little bit of change. Let me just do that quickly to show you what I mean. He just feels like he has ever so slightly like too short arms for his body size. Like, actually I should cut these into 2. Okay, so ever so slightly, something like this starts to feel a little bit more natural. You still keep that slight orientation that the arm has, but it just comes out a little bit further. Similarly with the back arm here, I feel like overall, including the hand, everything. The foreshortening, the hand pose, like all of that is looking pretty good. It just feels a little bit too short overall. You know, maybe even these ellipses as well, they need to be a little bit more exaggerated in the arm to really sell that foreshortening. We're going like slightly too flat here. I would really push those a little bit more so that we get the sort of the orientation and the bulk of the arm. Like I said, the slightly too short in the arm appearance there. So if I go back and forth between the OG and these, ever so slightly longer in their orientation. But in terms of like the gesture and the foreshortening in this back arm in particular, and the overall like pose for the dude, I think this looks really, really nice. I like the, you know, the orientation that you have for the feet, like the turned outwards and then this turned outwards on this side, but because of the orientation of the camera, it points towards us. That is a really nice touch. I like that you have, you know, we see the underside planes of the drum in here, like the ellipses seem good. Maybe even the belt goes slightly more this way here, but the orientation and where the camera is seems right. With the head here, I feel like this is maybe where the orientation starts to get slightly out. The camera's low. We established this because our horizon's really low. We see the underside planes of arms, the drum, the underside of the chin, the backside of the chest, all of this kind of stuff. We're aware that the camera in the scene is low down. And his head is tipped back. But I get the impression here that the camera, his head is tipped back and away from us, but I'm still seeing, for example, like the far side eyebrow, and it just feels slightly out of orientation to me a little bit. Let me do this a bit more simply. It's only slight. It's this isn't like, oh, the head's completely wrong or anything. It's just, it feels ever so slightly out when I look at the pose for the rest of the body. That yeah, that's kind of how it feels like, honestly. The orientation for your reference photo and the angle isn't the same as, you know, the camera for the scene itself, and so they seem slightly out of whack for that reason. And it's ever so slight, but I think you could solve that by getting someone else to take the reference so that they are low down when you do the pose, and so on. Because, yeah, it feels like his head, even though he's leaning back, it feels like his shoulder and stuff should be like here, as if you're sat at a desk or something and the camera's on the desk and it's like here, rather than the camera being like down here, and looking up. Because also from this orientation, if the camera's really low down and your head's back, in reality, you know, you'd be looking at the underside of the chin like this, and all of the features like really foreshortened on the top of the head, you know, like this, and then the helmet being open at the front like that, etc. And it would be like super foreshortened, and I don't think you want that. You don't think you want like basically that just being the underside of his chin under here. So you know, it's just a slight orientation change, really. Sorry, I'm just trying to sort of map it out in a simple sketch to illustrate the point. I like his beard, by the way. It's quite a nice little touch. Everyone else has got like pretty normal facial hair, and then the bard has got the really crazy, frivolous. It's good visual storytelling. I like that. Okay, so this starts to feel a little bit more like the orientation that it should be in, where we're essentially seeing a little bit more of the underside of the nose into the mouth. The center line of the head, because of the twist and the gesture backwards, is basically pointing up and out in this direction. If that's the center line of the body turned into this, and then the hips straighten out a little bit more and so on, then with that gesture of the head going off and back to the side, that center line is going to become the contour, especially at the very top of the head here, as it turns backwards, something like this, and then that changes the aperture of the helmet. So if the helmet comes down low and across his eyes and then behind the back of his head, I'll just make sure I get this right. Starts to look a little bit more along the lines of something like this. Can't be a bard without a strong beard. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So let me just show you the difference here in terms of head orientation and the aperture of the helmet and how that changes. Now, we can look at the orientation of the heads on other things, but just in terms of perspective, just something to be aware of. As if you have two forms on top of each other, let's draw a simple shape. Okay, everyone knows this Tetris piece, right? This Tetris piece, okay, and if we were to look at that from the side, we have basically what looks like a rectangle. I'll color code this. Okay, so to look at it from the side, it's like that. Okay, to look at it from the top is this, etc. So we understand this is made up of like 4 cubes. Okay, now what I'm seeing on the faces here, basically every face on here, and not just the faces, but let's say where the chest armor is versus the shoulder armor on here, etc., is we're not taking into account shapes that are protruding from a surface, occluding shapes behind them when orientated away from the camera. So what do I mean? If we just take the pink portion of this shape and I orientate it away from us, like this. Okay, I've put it in 3D. We're seeing it from below. And I've orientated it away from us like this. It's still the pink piece. We need to be aware of a few things happening. As this front surface is being turned away from us, you know, it appears to recede into space. What this also does is, from our view, these sections that were equally spaced, these squares that are next to each other, as that turns into space, that surface is getting shorter, right? From side to side. This surface is getting shorter in our view. So when it's front on, it looks like this. Yeah, equally spaced squares. But as it turns, that front surface gets shorter. So as that front surface is getting shorter, each one of those squares is also getting shorter, but exponentially from the closest one away from us. So what appears to happen is that this surface doesn't get divided up evenly into 3 equally sized spaces again. Okay? Each subsequent surface, the further away it is more foreshortened. So this square actually would be a lot shorter length, you know, width-wise, than this square, exponentially as well. So the same degree that this changes here is the same degree that this one changes to this one. It's the same degree that this one changes to this one. So what I see a lot of the time is this, like this, but, sorry, press the wrong button on my pen. This, but it's divided up into equal squares. Okay? And this is incorrect. This is correct. Okay? Because if you imagine each square turned, that surface is getting shorter, and this one is way further away. So it's even more foreshortened, right? So that's one concept that we need to understand here, to understand why this is incorrect and why this is incorrect and this is incorrect. Okay? The next part of this, which I think is the thing that kind of really boggles people a little bit, is this is fine for a flat surface, okay? We can understand that. Let me duplicate this. Let's go here. But he didn't know he'd signed up for a perspective lesson. With the most incoherent, rambling moron. Okay. So now let's take this shape. Okay. It's our pink rectangle split into 3 equal cubes, but now it has a cube stuck on the front of it, and it's the middle one. So in this orientation, you know, this, we draw the cube out. You know, it sits here in space, sticking out from the front like that. Okay, now you see what's happened here. Previously, we can see all the way down the front of this shape. Okay, this cube now sits out in front, so any information on the far side of it gets occluded. So now we can't see anything that's behind it. And the more we turn this, obviously until we get to like a completely side profile, the more that happens. So if I was to like unturn this a little bit more towards us, okay, and again, this is still slightly foreshortened, so all of these, this would be the widest one, this would be the next widest, this would be the smallest, because it's still turned away from us to a degree. It's just not as extreme as that, right? And I've got my middle one sticking out here. Blue, pink. Do you see that even though I've now rotated this back in this direction, this cube still occludes the stuff behind it? Okay? There is a certain amount of stuff that is still on the far side of that cube that we shouldn't be able to see. All right? And if you thought that this was like, oh, okay, this could be a nose, and my eyes can sit in this plane. You see that on how this side, that circle sits on the front here, we pretty much don't see it, right? It's still occluded. And that's what I mean by occluded. It's unseen by this shape. So let's think about that concept in relation to this face and where we are in space to figure that out. Okay? Our bard is basically the center of this illustration. Yeah? Over here. God's sake. Can't draw a straight line now. Yeah? This is like the center of the illustration right there. Where the bard is placed, you know, imagine a line coming out from between his legs. That's a kind of axis. And then there's another axis, right, is going this way in space. So if I think about the fact here that I can see both of his eyes basically fully, and I can see the far nostril, like the far nostril of his nose, and I can see the near nostril, and I can see the bulb of his nose. I can see the far side of his mouth, and unimpeded. So he's got this shape, and I see the flat side of his face. Do you start to see that? If we're thinking about this example, I'm past the center line of this in terms of the illustration. That things like his nose and things like the protrusion of his mouth and even the far side of his face, those things occlude everything that's behind. So the further to the right that I get on this illustration here, the more all of these things that protrude on any surface should be occluding the things that are behind them. So in reality, based on where his head is in relation to the center of our orientation, something like this, I'm going to sort of draw out the orientation that feels a bit more natural for this. So you see what I'm getting at? And this would even be slightly more from below than I've drawn it because the camera's low, but we'll deal with one problem at a time. So basically, our nose in this example is the blue cube, right? It sits out and in front of the face. And the plane that the eyes sit on is the pink stuff in this example. So the nose and the eyes sitting further back, that eye gets occluded. The far side of the mouth sits around the mouth. So what I see on the contour here is the lip and the bottom lip, and the mouth comes out and around, and then the far side, the far corner of the mouth is around that corner. Similarly, that's why I'm going to see like the edge of this eyebrow and not the eye itself. Here I'm going to see the underside of the mastoid, and so on. Everything is being occluded by the protrusions on the planes. So that then leads me on to things like this. Like, why is then this incorrect? Because in the same way that this would be the center line of this, and then the center line of this form of the neck, etc., you know, the chest protrudes outwards. You know, the sternum is like this, and the chest comes out this way, and so on, right? What we have here is the center line too far back. This center line needs to be out here. And we need to take into account that this form, this chest plate, you know, is kind of cylindrical. That if the center line is over here, all I'm going to see here is the contour of this part. And then the shoulder would appear to be occluded behind this. I wouldn't see this gap of the shoulder plate and the the shoulder armor. I wouldn't see that gap from this orientation. He's so far past the center line, foreshortened away from us, that anything on his center lines are going to be occluded behind. So this guy's armor, on his front, for example, where his center line of his chest is, where the shoulder appears behind his body, are in effect twisted towards us. If I turn this off and put a new center on here, you know, center line, we have established I can see both sides of his nose. Center line is like this. Center line on his neck is like this, so you got a very short chin. And then we've got the center line out here. It is slightly off, like out forward, but the orientation that this soldier is he's turned more towards us, when in reality he needs to be twisted out and facing away from us, with every form that protrudes off of his front surface occluding other surfaces behind it. To a lesser degree, the same happens here. This shoulder piece and that connection, they would appear to be slightly over each other, like this. Something like that. So this then, in this instance, feel like this hand is probably more like here, foreshortened, to hold the spear. It would be maybe something like that. And then obviously the shield would be out there, etc., to be in orientation. Listen, hopefully that stuff made sense. Using this as an opportunity to be a bit more of a lesson about that in general, but this particular thing in general about surfaces on surfaces occluding what's behind them is like the number one thing that I see in most drawings when something is in perspective, that we see basically too far around or too much of the other side of things. And yeah, this is why it can be really helpful to do this stuff in 3D and to see it, because or at least map things out in 3D. You saw the way that I drew the head here. Like, this helps me, pardon me, sorry, orientate everything in space by constructing it from the beginning and not copying a reference. If I was going to use a reference for, and I definitely would use a reference for this particular angle of a head, like, no joke, someone tipping their head back slightly away from you, defo use a reference for that. But to figure out what I need from the reference and to make sure that I take the proper reference, I will always construct it first, because the painting is going to be exaggerated and the forms are going to be changed in a way that you need them to work for you in the illustration, right? You need a certain facial expression. Your character has a bigger mouth, they have bigger eyes, all of that kind of stuff. You need to be able to take the right reference that's going to help you in the orientation, but you need to have the head already designed so that you don't just copy the reference and mash those two things together, and then you end up with like something that feels out of orientation. But yeah, having just like a 3D head on Blender or whatever, having some basic shapes, you know, the way that I set up the idea of the person in the shield in the beginning, you know, the person basically being that box and the shield being that slice. You know, like this. If you set those two things up in Blender and you just move your camera around and see how they interact, you'll very quickly get an understanding of what happens to like center lines as you move the camera around, and why they would only ever be aligned if you see it from the front dead on or if you see it from the top dead on. Those two things are, you know, orientated directly in front of each other with the center lines aligned. The only time that those center lines will be aligned is in those orientations. Otherwise, as you move them, these two center lines are going to move away from each other. You know, they're going to go this way, they're going to go this way, they're going to go this way, they're going to go this way. But you won't ever see them aligned. So if you were drawing this shield in front of this guy, you know, like this, like even further over, so that they're actually aligned like that. Now the shield is right up on him, you know, and it's really orientated over to the wrong side. But you'll see this super easy in 3D. You know, or maybe this is easy enough to see it, but so on and so forth. But yeah, it's really important concept to grasp, and it does take a lot of time to see correctly what it is, and your ability to see it as well will get better before your ability to execute it. I am very much in that boat as well, like when it comes to posing, especially like pushing the exaggeration of a pose, and still finding the right perspective for it. It's very difficult. Yeah, I still struggle with it quite a bit. So I wish you luck on the journey. But yeah, really nice piece. Like, line work quality, I think is really nice. And the main character himself, like, aside from, you know, the small amount of orientation in the head, the main character himself is perfect. The gesture, lovely. Really nice, like, visual storytelling in the image from, like, the soldiers being regimented and him being more animated. Yeah, really like the gestures, the foreshortening, his hands. I think were really well drawn. So, yeah, excellent stuff in there. Yeah, really, really, really very cool. Alrighty. So yeah, that concludes the paintovers. I went a bit more in detail with those, just because I thought it would be interesting for people watching to go over that. And yeah, when we're into the sort of regular schedule of the stream, what I will probably do is, like, every few weeks have one stream in the schedule that is dedicated to doing critiques, and that way, yeah, we can get into a few more pictures that people are doing, and it's like there's a dedicated stream for it. But cool. All right. Yeah, give me a sec. I need to grab some water, use the bathroom, and then I'll come back and I'll do some more painting, and we can chat about whatever. All right. See you in a second. Yo. Toilet cam. Yeah, we need to reach the sub goal for toilet cam. the sub goal of 20,000 subs. To which we have 3. So we're getting there. So some Huel, everyone, not sponsored. Lunchtime. Alrighty. So, do a little bit more on this. Has if anyone's got any questions, by the way, feel free to ask them. If it was about anything that we've just done or stuff like that, feel free. Otherwise, I'll just relax into painting some of this. Have you ever seen the the what's it called? What's it called? The Netflix series Love, Death, Robots. But specifically I think by far the best episode that's ever been on there. This one. Jibaro. Have you guys watched this episode? And have you seen the background paintings for these? What's the... Oh, let me find them before I start randomly clicking on everything. Dude, like the show in general, I'm not really a fan of overall. I think a lot of the stories are kind of shite. There's some cool animations, don't get me wrong. But this particular one is really, really cool. And the background paintings are insane. I'll put the link so you can have a look at these yourself, because you really have to look at them on a screen yourself to have a look at them. Hang on, I'll open one up. I just want to... The animation has this real... It's like you can't tell what's painted and what's not, and the animation itself is really, really well done. But all the backgrounds in the piece, like there is a point at which there is the animation, the characters moving, and they're 3D with painted textures and so on. And there's things that are in the background, like twigs that get moved, that are CG and animated, but the rest of the backgrounds are painted, and these are the backgrounds. And like I said, you really have to... I'll open one up on Photoshop. You really have to like zoom into these to even tell where the painting begins. But then when you do see it, it's very obvious that it's painted, and it just has incredible use of like the texturing, the smartness of the texture brushes that are used, and just an amazing abstraction of detail. But the values that everything is at, the texture brushes, you look at these rocks here, you can see that sort of mixer brush, color jitter, and so on, and like these textures, but they're absolutely incredible. And a lot of them are these really difficult scenes that have a ton of pebbles, leaves, overcast lighting, super crazy depth with trees and so on. And yeah, it's incredible. The animation itself is really, really good. It has like a cool story. It's very sort of visceral and violent, but in a very stylized way that a lot of the other ones just don't really capture. But yeah, these backgrounds are just incredible. Super, super insanely well painted. And I think this lady had a few more of them. There's one that I'm thinking of in particular. Yeah, oh man, that's so good. So yeah, like this. So there is a point at which parts of the illustration were, and this was on the kind of making of that I saw, but parts of the illustration are CG, in as much as like him moving and the plants that he goes through, particles, and like the lighting that changes on certain things, that's CG. But that it's seamlessly blended with, essentially the painting that's behind it. So almost like a matte painting is in it, in a real film, in a film. But yeah, it's just incredible, like really, really cool. Worth checking out. It's the only episode that I would recommend from the entire 4 seasons that they have. But yeah, anyway, so I just wanted to show you guys like what a good example of an environment painting looks like. As soon as I've subjected you to looking at mine up until this point, makes this one seem very lackluster by those standards. But yeah, give it a watch. It's fantastic. And it's only at maximum 10 minutes long as well, so perfect. I I cycled home in the snow yesterday after stream. It was like all frozen. The canal was frozen. Yeah, all the fields that I cycled past. It all looked very nice, but damn, it was cold. But yeah, today I go straight to my grandma's house. She does live at the top of a very, very steep hill, though. About to go for a jog. Nice. Yeah, at least you'll warm up pretty quick, though. Yeah, I need to get out there and do some like paintball related exercises that I've got. First like big paintball training of the season in a few weekends time. The season starts again. So I gotta get out there and dive on the floor a little bit and get back in the mode for another year of tournaments. First tournament will be in March, end of March, and we won the last tournament, so I want to come back and win the first tournament of this season. So we gotta get back in paintball mode. But you know, the thought of like diving on my front onto an icy floor while being shot at is not super appealing right now, but we'll do it. Has been a historical amount of snow for everyone, or is it normal amounts in the Netherlands? It hasn't snowed much in years. Yeah, I mean, in London in the last few Decembers, Januaries, it's just been, 5 or 6 degrees. Cold and rainy, but nothing like terrible. But yeah, this week it's been like -6 and snowing and windy at night, so it gets really cold. My phone was telling me that it was -6, but feels like -10 the other morning when I got up. I was like, what the fuck? Yeah, so it's it's definitely been colder than the average over here. Training montage, yeah, exactly. I'm looking forward to getting back into competition, man. The tournaments were so fun. Very nerve wracking. Like waiting on the start box to go. Oh my god, that like the 10-second countdown before the match starts. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's scary stuff. Very fun though, very fun. And I like all the guys that I play paintball with. There's a lot of really cool, solid dudes. It's so fun. But yeah, I'm gonna go back and do some fencing soon as well. Once Daisy's back and settled in, we're gonna go fencing again, which should be sick. So I'm just adding like lots of little extra things and nuance into this, like the reference obviously has a lot of, you know, rocks and stuff strewn around, which in the building of this image we omit all of those smaller details because they're not like relevant to the bigger picture, and like I always want to try and work general to specific when I'm building an illustration, so I don't want to worry about smaller rocks and, you know, set dressing essentially. But at a certain point in the illustration, at this point in fact, the illustration does start to have like a sort of emptiness to it, even though it's stylized, right? And there is a sort of a reduction in detail for that reason. There is a sort of an emptiness to the surfaces, and the cleanliness of certain shapes that does make it feel either very digital or like just a little bit unfinished in a way. So I'm just starting to go around, and I'm on a flat layer on top right now. I'm like just jumping around all over, and yeah, just adding little additional things that I think will give it a bit more life. And I'm not too worried at this stage about them being on their own separate layers. You know, this is a kind of advanced study, if you like, has kind of reached its eventual end goal. So at this point, I consider all of this just like finishing touches, and then, you know, at the end of the stream, I'll save it, and then that'll be that. That'll be the end of that one. So yeah, I'm just gonna spend like the last time that I have today kind of mucking around on this. It's been a really nice illustration to work on. Like I said, I have not actually sat down and dedicated time to doing an environment painting for forever. Like there's been environments and stuff I've painted, but to just sit down and actually just do a bit of an environment study and try to figure that out, it's been a good little process, and I would like to do some more of them on stream. You know, every now and again do a whole couple of streams on another environment, and yeah, don't know what that next environment will be. I did talk about sort of, you know, something that would be a bit more of a challenge would be like a sunny day, bright sunny day kind of illustration where there isn't kind of mist and ambiguity to hide in. So that could be a possibility. I'll just see whatever my mood, whatever mood I'm in, when it's time for that. But yeah, I'll definitely do another one. As I said, I do want to get better at environments. I think it's definitely a good skill to have. It'd be a while until I was like, yo, I'll take an environment commission, or like do some environment work for a client. I don't think I'm quite there yet, but to improve the environments that I already have to deal with, I think this is good practice. Just needs like a dude on a rock here with the concept art spear and cloak, and like the hint of a dragon in the mist, or like some kind of huge bear to really push it into the realm of concept art. You know what I mean? Like some idea of like a towering sort of humanoid troll. In the back. Or Shrek. Massive Shrek. You know what I mean? Just see like some dragon's eyes in the mist. Back here. Horns. Yeah, we're not going there. We're not going there. What? Or even just something like real subtle, like You get this sort of UFO. UFO hovering in the landscape. Something very subtle like that. Hovering back there. I don't mind that. It gives me what's that illustrator that did the book series of what's his name? Simon Stalenhag. It's got that slight feeling about it, if you know who I mean. You know, does all of these. I think they even made a Netflix series out of it. But he does these illustrations that are, you know, these really eerily sort of normal, but with something very sci-fi in them. And he's got a few books, and he does these great landscape paintings that, you know, are like everyday scenes, but with this weird stuff going on. Yeah, it's got small amount of that feeling in it. Yeah, there you go. Devon knows. Yeah, his illustration style is really nice. Really, like super clean, simple surfaces, but he just gets that overcast lighting down perfect. Yeah, he's really good at that. Rob Rupel as well. He has a really nice, like, sort of very simplified style that he does environments in that is very enviable. So yeah, we'll keep a very subtle flying saucer in there. Why not? With someone being taken. Tales from the Loop. That's what one of his books is called. I was whirring around in my head. Tales from the Loop, and then Things from the Flood, or something after the flood, maybe. Yeah, no, good books. Oh no. Sorry. Don't like this tree area. Kind of didn't turn out how I wanted to, that little bit. So let's get rid of it. Where are you? We must rebuild. Okay. Yeah, it starts to feel a bit better. I think I just made it into like a much bigger thing, about a much bigger tree than I wanted it to be, and then it started looking pretty strange. Love the UFO. Where's the cow? That's what it needs. Alright. Cow incoming. Do we have a custom shape cow? Do we have one? Wild animals. No. What about a deer though? Yeah, it could be. They have enough cows by now. Yeah, they've been on that cow thing for quite some time. Been on a cow hype for a while now. They're like, do you know what we want to turn inside out now? A stag. Actually, what would feel really weird? Do you kind of like the idea of it being like... some poor dude. He was just out for a walk. He's like, "Ah." Sorry. That's when it would happen as well, you know. You just be out for a nice, like, misty walk, and then goddamn aliens. It's them goddamn aliens again. I hate when that happens. Yeah, exactly. Finally trying one of those mental health walks, and then you have hope. He's like, yeah, man, people tell me I need to go for a walk. It's going to be really good for me. And I plan to go on Thursday. And yeah, it's going to be great. I'm going to clear my head. Get a bit of me time. Immediate abduction and subsequent tampering with by advanced alien race. Essentially on a joyride. Yeah, or it's like one of those like War of the Worlds tripods. I actually did quite enjoy that. The War of the Worlds, the Tom Cruise one, when it came out. I was pretty into it. Yeah, like one of them just like walking in the mist at the back. I think I still prefer the flying saucer though, to be honest. It's pretty cool. Subtle. Yeah, I think the saucer is quite nice and quite subtle, a bit silly, you know. Don't mind subtle and silly. All right, homies. I'm gonna wrap it up there for today. I'm pretty zonked from all the talking and painting. But yeah, really nice stream today. Thanks for everyone who tuned in. Thanks for the follows. Thanks to Oracle and Yona for letting me do paintovers on their pieces today. And I will be back next week for streaming again. And yeah, we'll get back onto the main project image and we'll do some more studies and all that kind of good stuff. There won't be a stream tomorrow, as I mentioned at the beginning. I've got some stuff I need to do tomorrow. But yeah, I'll be back next week, Tuesday, same time, for another few days of streaming. So I wish everyone a really good rest of the week. As usual, all the videos will be on the YouTube straight after the stream has ended. So if you wanted to check out anything from the stream that you missed today, they'll be there. And yeah, otherwise, it was fantastic. Thanks for coming to hang out. It's been really cool. Have a good rest of your day and a great weekend, everybody. Toodles!